Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of My Fiber Fun. Well, today, you guys, we're getting ready to wrap this up. We're going to ready to wrap up the mini-series. So we ended up with, it will be 7 parts, because this is part 7, and we will be concluding the mini-series of Mr. Henry Columbus Andrews. Okay, I hope that you've enjoyed the story thus far. It seems to have held your interest, so we're going to finish it up today. Okay, then our next story is going to be, and I'll probably wait a week or two before starting that, because that's going to be a long one. That's probably going to run more than 7 episodes. And that's going to be of my college days from beginning to end. A lot of the stuff you've already heard, because I basically had to tie it in during that period of my life. Like, for instance, when I talked about, living in Oklahoma, when I, got sick and all that stuff, you hear that mentioned a lot. And then during the Mr. Andrews story, I had to tell you a few of my college stories of things that had happened while I was in college. Excuse me, I gotta sneeze. Well, oh, y'all, I was trying to pause. Didn't happen. But anyway, I was telling you some of the stories of, what happened while I was in college in Oklahoma. Okay, second part of the preliminary, and then there's one more, and then we will conclude the mini-series. I finished the scarf, you guys. Okay, I ended up not making a super long scarf, and actually, I might go on and extend it, but what I did was I stopped it, and I decided that I would use the rest of the yarn, because I said this is enough of this and the other, because they're the same size, almost a full skein of it. And I was like, oh, I can make the trashy, I call it the trashy shawl, but as you all know, it's going to be the diamond mesh shawl to crochet along. I was like, oh, it's enough of this where I can make a nice, I said I could do a triangular scarf, or I can get the full shawl out of this, and I would just do the one strand. And so I tested to see, what size hook I would use and everything. And so I was going to take this down and start it over for the tutorial. And then for the stitch marker, because you're going to need 2, I pulled out my little yellow ones that you could see easily, so you'll know right where to place them and everything, because that's going to be the most crucial part of the shawl. Very easy, and it's going to work up very fast too. You're going to find that out. And so I was like, I'll just use this, and I like, how this kobu feels, with it being rayon, bamboo, and all that stuff. Then it dawned on me. I was like, wait a minute. I have this Big Twist value yarn. Remember when I was planning on making the safety shawl with this orange, this bright orange? I was like, I can use this for the tutorial, although it's acrylic, which is fine because this Big Twist is very, very soft. I said I can double strand this and make the shawl, my safety shawl, in the diamond mesh. And I think you'll be able to see this better. So I think that's what I'm going to do. And then I'll save this. I'll probably just go on and extend this scarf. But anyway, and this was the third part of the preliminary, so so this is it. So this is the color that I'm gonna use for the safety shawl tutorial, and for the diamond mesh shawl tutorial and my safety shawl. Although I'm a double stranded, because this Big Twist, although it's supposed to be a 4-weight, is very thin and soft. It kind of puts you in the mind of the Caron Simply Soft, but it is acrylic. And so I'm a double stranded to make it thick. And so you guys will be able to get a good visual of what's happening and how to do the crochet along. And you're welcome to use any yarn of your choice, whether be it chunky, be it thin, be it 2-weight, it doesn't matter. It's going to be the same technique. So that's just, the yarn that I'm using. And then I'm gonna probably use my size L hook, which is a larger hook. So you will get a good visual of what I'm doing and how to do it and what to do and all that. Okay, so back to this real quick before we begin the story. So this ended up measuring out 82 inches long. And remember, I said I wanted it to be super long and all that. Actually, it's long enough, y'all. It's long enough. But I have it on like as a shawl now because it's wide enough too. As you can see, I kept that wide stitch. I really like this. And someone had asked if there was a pattern to this, and I did answer you back, and I just let you know what I did. And what I did was I chained, it was either 55 or 65 across. And I just did the regular V-stitch, which is 2 double crochets, skip 2, 2 double crochet. Oh, wait, you do 1 double crochet, chain 1, and then another double crochet in the same stitch. And so to start it, that's what you do. You skip a stitch, and then you do your next repetition. So you're gonna have 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. You're gonna have 18 repetitions. So, and then you skip in one. So I only chained 36, you guys. I didn't chain 65, I chained 36 because you only skip one in between. So, yep. So that's all you need. But then I used this, I doubled up the yarn too. So that's why mine got this wide. So you will go as wide as you want, or as wide or narrow, and then you would just follow what I just said about doing your V-stitch. And I just did the V-stitch. I just kept going and going until I felt that it was long enough. So it's long enough. The shawl, you know, it comes down to my waist and everything. It goes part ways down my back. I didn't want it going all the way down, but it's long enough. Right now I'm wearing it as a shawl because it's 91 degrees outside and I got that air on refrigeration mode. I think I put it on 70 because it was hot up in here because I turned it off at night. And so I had to cool it off. It's still running. So I'll probably just end up cutting the air off, or I'll cut it up so that it won't run like it is. But right now I'm cold because I'm sitting here half naked, and then here I am with the shawl on. But anyway, you can snoot it. Y'all know I love my snoot, so let's snoot it. See? And that snoot goes all the way back. So there we go. Mufasa. And then it's long enough for me to do this. So I can wrap it around like this with the snoot. I love that. Makes me look skinny. Let me stop. Knowing good and well, won't nothing make me look skinny but to lose some weight. And wait a minute, I'm starting my diet and I got my little exercise and stuff and that little fake bike thing that with the pedal that the MSAA sent me. So I'm getting ready to get started with that. But yeah, I love the snood part. So I'm gonna wear this in the winter. And my coat is black. I guess this will match the black. It's gonna have to, unless I make another one. Now, you know I have that beige Kobu yarn, so I may make another one because I really like how this came out. But anyway, so if I don't want to snoot it, if I want to just wear it as a scarf, I wanted it to be nice and thick where I could just wrap it, you know, and then I've got the 2 little wings that go on the back of my shoulders like that. It's perfect at this length. I didn't need to make it, you know, to where it went down to the floor and all that stuff. I mean, eventually I may make a scarf like that, but I could still, and then I could use it to wrap over one shoulder instead of both. You know, if I'm dressed up and I don't have on a coat, but I just want to wear a scarf or something like that, and I need something to, you know, let's say it's summertime and I'm in a restaurant or something, so I could style it up, you know, wearing it like this, and it just drapes down the back on one shoulder, you know, that type of thing. I can do a lot with this. I call it my piece. So, yep, but I really like it. But for now, let me cover up because it is freezing up in here. Okay, so, let's get on with the story. I done wasted 10 minutes already, or almost 10 minutes. Okay, so let's finish this up. So let's see how, I don't know how long this is gonna take, but it shouldn't take too long. I'm thinking we'll probably wrap up in about 30 minutes or so. Possibly longer, possibly shorter, as things come to me. Okay, so where we left off was with September 11th, 2001. And y'all, let me tell y'all this before I continue on with the story. It's no doubt in my mind, can't prove it, but I believe that the TVs and the electronics and all that stuff are listening to us. Now, when I told the last story, although, yeah, it was posted up, so maybe, you know, something got recorded or whatever. I don't know, you know. But after I talked about September 11th of 2001, all of a sudden my algorithm loaded up with September 11th videos. So of course I went down the rabbit hole into depression watching the coverage, because it was like live coverage and stuff, and I just watched it. I usually watch on the anniversary, and that's it. I don't usually watch 911 information, but on the commemoration anniversary, I always watch because everybody in this world who remembers that, because I was thinking, wow, my little niece, she was born in 2000. She was only a year old, so she has no idea. She might have seen what happened and stuff. She has knowledge of it now because now she'll be 25 years old in December. But she was only a year old, so she has no recollection or no memory. In fact, my other nieces and nephews, the only ones who may remember, John was 5, so he may not remember it. My other nephew was 3 at the time. And then my brother's children, Ashley, my oldest niece through my brother, she's 36 now, but she was only 11 or 12, so she would remember it, but she was such a young kid, it may not have affected her like it did us, And then her brother, Nicholas, he's 3 years younger than her, so he's 9. So I'm quite sure they remember it, but not in a way of which we all do, being older. But they were saying everybody remembers exactly where they were. I remember well. Guess where I was? Right there in Oklahoma. And I'll tell my part of the story. When it happened, I had woke up that morning, and one of my cousins who live in Tennessee, we used to chat all the time. Remember when AOL had the You Got Mail and all that stuff? And so at the time I had AOL, and then I also had Yahoo Messenger. And so you could type messages back and forth. And that's how I would talk to my mom, because back then, I don't think I had a cell phone. I just had a regular house phone. And so to keep the long distance bills down, we would just chat online unless we had to call each other for something. So every day I had this whole list of people who would chat. So lots of times when I turned on my computer in the morning, when I got up, somebody would pop on. So this day it happened to be my cousin Anita, who lives in Tennessee. And so she popped up and she said, "Hi, good morning. How you doing?" I was like, "I'm doing fine." She was like, "I see you just came on." She said, "You just got up?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Turn on your TV." I'm like, turn on the TV? I was like, okay, let me turn it on. So I turned on the TV. First thing I saw was the first plane crashing into the North Tower. I was like, "Anita, what did I just see?" And then she was like, "We're under attack." I'm like, oh my God. So then I was like, okay, let me get off and see what's happening here, So I started watching the coverage. And I didn't have class that day until, my class was late that day. But I had, what day did September, I think it was a Tuesday when that happened. All I know is that on that day I had my 3 o'clock class. I remember that real well, and it was a math class that I had that I was flunking. But anyway, when I got to class that day, we were sent home. They closed the college down because I was at UCO by then, and so they closed the college down that day, and we were closed down for, I think, pretty much the rest of that week, if I'm not mistaken. We didn't have to go to class. They just shut it down. And we continued where we left off that following week. So nobody was behind or anything. So basically, and I'm going to tell you why they shut it down. The people of Oklahoma, they had just gone through the Timothy McVeigh thing. It triggered those people. And I felt bad because I did not live in Oklahoma City when that incident happened. In 1990, I think it was in 95, but I remembered it well. And I was there during the time that they executed him. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they televised it. It was late at night. They kept saying throughout the day, if you have children, make sure they're in bed. I believe they televised it. They didn't show him. The way that it was televised, it was like special coverage. They talked about what was going to happen. Of course, they showed him, being led to the thing and all that. They didn't show him actually dying, but you knew it was happening. And it was a little bit too much for anyone who may have been triggered children, you know, especially children. So throughout that whole day, they kept announcing, please. And they only showed it in Oklahoma throughout the state because they debated whether or not they would televise it. And so did I watch it? I don't think I watched it. But the point is, I met people, even my relatives, actually my uncle, my mother's brother, and one of their sons, and he's actually deceased now, Tony. He died a couple of years ago. The two of them should have been in the federal building or whatever. I think it was the federal building, the Oklahoma City Federal. I forget what building this was. They were supposed to be in there because my cousin had a court date for something. And they were supposed to be there, and they were running late due to traffic. And so they were downtown when everything happened, and they got stuck down there. My aunt called my mother, and she did not know if my uncle and cousin were still alive after that happened. And so that was a big thing for us here in Michigan. Oh, my mother, oh, it was just a nightmare. And then we were all just worried because they were on their way down there, and they had a 9 o'clock appointment. And whenever the thing went off or whatever, and then they lost lots of friends. They lost church members. They lost friends. Everyone from Oklahoma that I met knew someone that had passed away during that time. And it wasn't that long, because this was like 5 years later, you know. So, you know, I heard about it all the time. They talked about it all the time, and it bothered me, but then I was empathetic to it. So anytime people talked about it, I just sat patiently and listened and whatnot. I didn't think to say, okay, you're having trouble moving on or whatever. I'm not a counselor or whatever. So I would just sit there and listen, and I felt bad. I mean, I had the empathy for it, but I couldn't grasp it because I didn't know anyone, or I didn't experience it. Let's put it that way. I knew of it and everything, but I didn't experience it. So I just kind of, you know, listened. But some people just couldn't stop. I mean, like during college and stuff, some people just could not stop. It was like, it became their life, so to speak. And now my family, it didn't, you know, they talked about, especially on the anniversary, but September 11th, I'll never forget, it triggered that. Oh my God. The local news, you could hardly listen to what was going on. I stayed on the national stations because the local stations, basically, they relived the whole thing about Oklahoma, the Oklahoma City thing. And so, although, you know, I empathized with that, I wanted to hear about what was happening now that was affecting all of the United States. See what I'm saying? I hope y'all get what I'm trying to say. So at that time, I needed to put the Oklahoma City incident out of my mind and focus on the here and now. That was me. So I stayed on the national stations. I did have cable, so I kept it on CNN, you know, and those stations, your national news stations. I didn't go local because it was just overwhelming, and the people were triggered. Oh, all kind of stuff happened. In fact, I felt bad because, and I know I'm getting into something totally different here. I'm sorry, but I need to say this. Okay, I felt bad because the apartments that I lived in, Chowning Heights, the apartments I loved, it was so diversified. We had some of everybody up in there of every ethnicity, and I love diversity like that. Everybody got along. And so the men that lived above me, I had some people from India that lived next door. And then me being black, then we had the Africans here, the Chinese there, and all that. But above me, there were 2 Arabic men. They were roommates, and I don't know what country they were from. I knew they were Muslim because we would sit outside at night and talk. And so they would have their Quran, and so they were telling me, about their religion, and I told them, I'm Christian and I read the Bible and whatnot, and like I said, I don't say anything. I was like, okay, so tell me, about yours. So we sit there and talk and whatnot, and then they read the Quran. I'm looking at it; it's in a totally different language, and then they read it from back to front. If I'm not mistaken, that's what they were showing me, that they read it from back to front. I said, you know what, that kind of makes sense, because when we read the Bible from front to back, actually the last story in the Bible is Revelations about the end. That's where I was like, that's where we should be starting, because we're in that time now. And so, it was kind of interesting how it all worked. But anyway, the Arabics, they didn't fare well that day or the weeks to come in Oklahoma City, because people were so triggered. We lived like right around the corner from a 7-Eleven. In fact, ironically enough, I live around the corner from a 7-Eleven now. But anyway, and so a lot of Arabic people, your college students and stuff, worked in the convenience stores, gas stations, that type of thing. So you had a lot of Arabic, Indian folks were getting attacked. I ain't lying. But what touched me the most, because even when I was watching the coverage, it's not that hate came in my heart, but I was mad, because when they was talking about Bin Laden and Arabic and all this stuff, I got mad. I was like, now they done brought their butt over here and decided to kill us. I was upset, but it didn't mean I was going to hate them all. And I certainly didn't hate my neighbors, because we had become friends. But what touched me was, all of a sudden, I'm sitting in my apartment watching the coverage, okay? And all of a sudden, all these Arabic people swarmed the parking lot. I'm like, uh-oh, I'm doomed. That's what I'm thinking, right? I'm sitting there looking out my window. It must have been 50 of them. And my neighbors lived right above me, because I was like in a townhome, but it was still like an apartment, but it was a townhome, because I had to climb stairs to get to my apartment. You had 3 tiers, the bottom, the middle, and the top. But we had our own entrances, and then the way it was set up, it's hard to even explain. It was almost like a split, because on the first floor was my living room and kitchen. That was it for the first floor. Then you climb like 3 or 4 steps, and then you have like this big vestibule hallway type deal where your linen cabinet is. Then you had your bathroom, and if you lived in a 1-bedroom like myself, you had this big huge bedroom. That was your second floor. And then you had your people above you, your people below you. So I loved this little townhome that I had. Anyway, and my rent was $250, y'all, back in 2001. That's unheard of now. Oklahoma was cheap, okay? You can get a luxurious anything for a little or nothing. Cost of living was cheap. Okay, but anyway, so what touched me, when they swarmed, I'm sitting up there like, uh-oh, I hope they don't decide. I hope, it's not a big thing where everybody's getting ready to attack us or whatever. I had no idea. At that time, it was early. They went up to that apartment, and like I said, it was about 50 of them. And when they got up there, of course, I could hear them, because they walking in and everything. And I'm listening. At that point, I'm ready to, if I could have reached that ceiling, I would have put a glass to the ceiling to see what they were talking about. But I'm listening, because I got quiet. I turned my TV down. Those men and women, because it was, it was men and women, they were in there and they started praying. And I knew they were praying. Some words were English, some words were Arabic, and they were just praying. I'm quite sure they were praying for themselves, and they were praying about the situation at hand. And I knew they were. It's like my soul stirred, and it let me know they're not praying for anything bad or whatever. They're praying for the peace and things like that. And they prayed for about a good hour. Because Muslims, they pray at certain times, 12:3, they were telling me about that. And this was before the time that they normally prayed. This was still in the morning. It was like maybe 10:30. And so they were just up there praying and praying and praying. And then when they got through, then the people left, and they were traveling together, and they had to, because like I said, in Oklahoma, the folks were triggered. And people were getting beat up. They were beating people up, pulling them out cars and everything, just for no reason. And so I felt really, really bad for them. And so later that day, when I saw my neighbors, they had you know, they were inside, but they did come out, you know, I don't know if they were going somewhere or what, but when I saw them, I opened my door and I said, thank you for praying. And they looked and they said, yes, we prayed. And I told them, be careful out there. I said, be careful. I said, you know, I care about you and I don't want you to get hurt or anything. And they said that they would. And so that was it. But, you know, we continued on being friends up until, you know, the end and whatnot before I left and all that. But anyway, okay, back to the story. I just wanted to say that because that was oh, no, I didn't finish my experience. Okay, so that was one incident during the whole thing. And so then while I was watching the news coverage, they were like, don't live in fear, don't be fearful. And I'm thinking to myself, it's too late for that. Anytime something big happens, mass shootings and everything, oh no, God gave us the fear sense for a reason. He wouldn't have given it to us if he didn't want us to live in fear. Oh, I was scared. Okay, I ain't lying. I'm looking up in the sky to this very day every time I hear an airplane. And that's just how much that affected me. Every time I hear airplane to this very day, I'm looking up there, especially if it's extra loud. And why do I live in the pathway of our airport, which is about 5 miles from me? So you know right now, I'm dealing with airplanes all the time. And, you know, I'm always fearful of the crash too. You know, one could crash right in our neighborhood because they be starting to land as they're coming through here to get to the airport, which is about 5 miles away. Okay, which is right by the liquidation store. In fact, the liquidation store was just a wee bit past the airport, maybe a mile. So anyway, so they had stopped all, you know, air coverage for that day. They said all airplanes were grounded. But before they grounded all the airplanes, they were saying that there were some unaccounted for. And like that Pennsylvania one. And then there was another one that was headed towards Washington, D.C. And so one of the news report people sat there and said, I think that there's like 50 planes up that's unaccounted for. And they were like, what if they're going to every state? And that's what got me. I was like, I'm here by myself in Oklahoma, although my uncle and all them were there, but I'm there in Edmond at that time by my darn self. And my uncle and them were there. I started thinking about my immediate family, my mother, my brother, my sister, my nieces and nephews. They were over 1,000 miles away. At that point, all of a sudden, I just wanted to get home. I wanted to be home with my family, because on a day like that, we all would have just been together, and we would have, that's how it would have been with us. My uncle and them, they were triggered from the Oklahoma City stuff, so I didn't get with them. And so what I ended up doing later that day, and now we're getting back to the story, I ended up going up to the hospital. I was like, because I tried to call my mother, and my mother didn't answer the phone. I was like, oh my God, she might be somewhere and a plane might have crashed. But, you know, I'm thinking Detroit, you know, because they've always told us we have a bomb alarm. You know, they set it off one time as, I remember when I was a kid, they set it off because they had to run a test on it. And it was so loud. But because of it being the automotive capital, is not as much anymore. I mean, we still have plants and stuff. But when I worked in the plant, I used to work for Kelsey Hayes for a short period before I quit that job. But we made brake valves. And while we worked there, anybody who work in the automotive industry know that if a big war ever break out, they do the changeover. You go strictly from making cars to parts for the Army and whatnot. So our brake valves, we did one called the Hummer, and that is that big Army like tank type vehicle. And then Hummers came out but this was before the Hummer car came out. Remember when that came out back in the 90s or the early, it was the 90s, either the 90s or early 2000s. Well, we made the Hummer brakes way before the vehicle Hummer came out. We made them for the Army. You know, we made parts for the Army. And we do it, you know, it would be just so many, however many they requested. But if a war had ever broke out, all the automotive plants would change over to making stuff, tools and things like that, you know, for the military. We already knew that. and all that in our training and stuff. So we already knew that. So what's the first place that's going to get hit if a war were to break out? Detroit, Michigan, and the surrounding areas. So I'm thinking, oh Lord, they done hit Detroit, because they know it's gonna, we're gonna go to war and all this stuff. So they done hit Detroit. My mama. I just freaked out. I started crying because when I went to call her, I didn't get no answer. Everybody I tried to call, I didn't get no answer. My mother ended up calling me like later that night, and she said she had actually gone to church and they were praying and whatnot after what happened. I told her I was just miserable. I was like, Mom, I want to come home. She was like, nope, you just stay right there. You'll be okay, blah, 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 blah. And I truly believe 911 is what set the stage for my illness. And I say that because I had that injury, and that injury is what triggered my immune system. And the doctor had told me, you had autoimmune disease long before you had your first attack. He said, you just needed a trigger, and lots of times injury can trigger it, your autoimmune response. And so I believe the injury, because I had stepped on that hook on the 20th of August. So we're only a couple of weeks in on that. And then 9/11 occurred. That stressed me out to the max, I tell you. And then Mr. Andrews died. And then I had an uncle right after that. My uncle's aorta ruptured, and he shouldn't have lived through that, but he survived. This was my father's brother. In fact, he's still alive today. And then it was like, and then a family friend, a good family friend, died of a certain sudden heart attack. All these things were just happening. And so next thing I knew, I woke up that Christmas morning sick, and that was the end of me. Okay, I've been sick ever since, with the autoimmune stuff. But anyway, I decided, I was so stressed out and frazzled. I was like, Mr. Andrews, let me get up to the hospital and see how he's doing. I knew his niece and nephew, would probably be there, but they weren't there when I arrived. And they had his TV on, right on the 911 stuff. And he asked me, he said, what's going on? And I told him, I told him what happened, since he's sitting there watching it. And so I told him, and he was like, whoa. And basically, then after that, he like took a nap. So I'm sitting there in his hospital room watching it. Then his niece and nephew came and stuff. So, we all visited. He woke back up. And actually, I think I had cut the TV off before they arrived, because it got to the point I was like, he sleep. First of all, I didn't want him disturbed. And then I thought maybe he shouldn't be watching this. And I certainly shouldn't have been watching it. But I cut the TV off, and that was it. And so, and that was after I was sent home from school, because I went to the class at like 3 o'clock, and they said school's closed, report back, we'll let you know, you'll hear it on TV when it's time to report back and everything. So since my school, I live right around the corner from my school, and then Mr. Andrews, the hospital was like a block away from that. The school was a block away from me, and the hospital was 2 blocks from me. It was like I could have walked either or, Sometimes I would walk to campus, but I never walked to the hospital. And that day I drove, because I knew that after class I would be going to the hospital. But I went on, once they had let school out, I went back home, was watching coverage, and then I went back. I decided to go to the hospital after that. So anyway, so that was that day. Okay, so then, things went on as usual as far as Mr. Andrews was concerned. I was there every single day, and of course his niece and nephew and stuff. And then I met a few other family members who would come to see him, like great nieces and nephews, very few, not too many. And so, okay, so now we're skipping ahead to, so just know that all this was going on. Then it was time for him to be released from the hospital. This was maybe 2 weeks or close to it after the surgery. And so they had did they were doing the rehabilitation and the physical therapy. He could not walk. He was still in a wheelchair, and he would probably remain in one because of his age and everything. But his hip had healed enough to where he could be released from the hospital. And I'm thinking, wow, he pulled through this, because I truly did not think that he was going to pull through breaking his hip. And I was like, especially at his age, this is it. So remember, I was thinking, wow, he might pull through this, because he was still talking, eating, he was his regular self, with the exception of the injury. And so the time had finally come for him to be released. So the niece was telling me, she said he'll be coming to Oklahoma City, but he will need to go to the nursing home there. So that's where he'll be. And he had this little sad look on his face because he did not want to go to a nursing home. So he was back in that situation again. And of course, it's still blazing hot, but by then it's September, so it might have dropped maybe 10 degrees. So we were probably at 100 then instead of 102 and 20, okay? And so he had to go to the nursing home. So I told Mr. Andrews, I was like, you still close by? I said, I'll be there to see you, just about. I was like, when you were in Guthrie, I was there to see you every other day. I went like 2 or 3 times a week. I was like, but I will make sure that I am there to see you at least twice a week. I was like, so you'll be okay, you know. So he seemed okay with that. And so that was coming up because they still had to get all the things done. So it took like a week before his actual discharge day came. So we had started school back, you know, that following week after 9/11. So I went back to my regular routine. You know, I'll do my night classes. Usually for my evening classes, I would go, because it got to the point where I went to the hospital. I was there every day. So I would go to the hospital and before classes, because I did not get out of my last class until like 7:30. And by then our days were shorter, so it would be night. And so I would go to the hospital early on those days, and then on my non-school days, because I only went to school Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On my non-school days, Tuesday and Thursdays, I would go to the hospital in the morning, and I would stay pretty much all day, or at least part of the day, unless it was something else I had to do. And then also on Monday, I had the one class. It started at 3, and I got out like at 4:30. So on that day, sometimes I would go to the hospital in the morning, I would leave and go to class, and then I would come back, or either I would just go after class. I wouldn't go in the morning. I would sleep in, and then I would go after class at around 4:30. So on this particular day, it was a Monday, and this was the 25th of, no, this was the 26th of September. So his niece called me. And she was like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm getting ready to go to class. I said, but I'll be out of class at 4:30. This was on a Monday. And so she was like, okay, you'll be out at 4:30. She was like, are you going up to she was like, can you go up to the hospital when you get out of class? I was like, oh yeah, I was going to go up there anyway. She said, they're going to be moving Uncle Henry this evening. She said, but they want me at the nursing home to meet him. But then they want me at the hospital to see him off. She said, I can't be at both places at once. And I was calling to ask if you could be at the hospital. I was like, do you need me to go earlier? I said, I can take the day off. I said, because I'm just doing this math class. I said, so I can go and get the homework or whatever from the professor. I was like, and I can miss class if need be. She was like, She was like, no. She was like, actually, the hospital and nursing home wanted me to give them a time. She was like, so I'll let them know that you'll be up there, let's say 5 o'clock. I was like, that would be perfect. She's like, and then I will be at the nursing home at 5. She's like, I'll call you back to confirm that, which she did. So it was all set up. I needed to be at the hospital by 5 o'clock because they were going to be scheduled to pick him up then. And then she was going to be at the nursing home. And so when I got out of class that day, I called her and I let her know I'm on my way up to the hospital now. It was actually a little earlier. I think she let us out of class at maybe 4 that day, 4 or 4:15. So I was on my way. In fact, I was at the hospital walking in by 4:30. So I get to the hospital and I called the niece once I got there to let her know that I was there. And so she said, okay, she was like, I'm getting ready to leave to go to the nursing home now because she lived close to the nursing home. So I said, okay, I said, I will call you back once they've picked him up. I said, how are they picking him up anyway? She said, actually, he's being transported by a van. And I was like, wow. So Mr. Andrews, actually, he was put into the van. And they put him, it was one of those vans. It didn't hold the wheelchair or anything because I saw him off. He was actually transported to the seat. They helped him into the van, and he was buckled up in the seat. He was able to sit up and ride in the van like anybody else, but he was like in the back. You know, they had him in the back, and there was a lot of room in there and everything. And I didn't think, I was like, dang, I should have rolled with them, but then I would have needed to ride back to Edmond. And so I was like, well, I won't, because they had an attendant back there, and then you had your driver. So it was two. So the attendant rode in the back with them. But anyway, okay, so I get to the hospital, and so Mr. Andrews, they had him dressed. He had on his hat. He looked like any regular day. His little suspenders and his clothes and everything, they had him dressed. And he's sitting in a chair. Actually, he was sitting in a wheelchair because they were going to, of course, roll him out. And so when I got in there, I said, well, Mr. Andrews, I was like, well, you know what today is. I was like, you getting ready to go to the nursing home. I said, I'm here to see you off. I said, but remember, I'll be coming to see you every day. I said, your niece, and I forgot her name. What was her name? Arnetta. I said, Miss Arnetta will be at the nursing home waiting on you when you get there. He said, okay. And so I looked at him, and he's giving me this look. And I said, okay. And this is one thing, because my father had died, you know, the year before. And I remember when I saw my father for the last time, which was the day I was leaving for Oklahoma. Actually, I was leaving to go. I had to drive to Indiana and my uncle, I was going to my mother's other brother who lived in Indiana. I was going to his home in Gary. And then he was actually going to drive the van to Oklahoma with all my stuff, but I had to get to him. And then I drove to him that day, and then we spent the night at his house, and then he and his wife. And then the next day we left at like 3 a.m. We all gathered into the van, and we drove on to Oklahoma, and we arrived that night. And then my uncle, he stayed a few days before he went on back to Indiana. He ended up taking a plane back. And so, but he wanted to make sure I got there safely. And at the time, my father was kind of sick and stuff. And so I remember that last day when I was getting ready to leave, I had gassed up, and I went to my parents' house to tell them goodbye. And so my father had given me some money. He was like, you keep this. He was like, don't spend it or anything. He's like, you keep this in case you ever have to get home or whatever. He was like, you have this money. He was like, don't blow it or anything. I just want to send you off with a little something. He was like, although you're good and grown, but he's like, I did that with your brother and sister when they went off to college. So here you go. So he gave me, I think it was $300 or something, but he told me, hold on to it because you never know. You might have to come home, you know, at a whim or whatever. He's like, or you may have it for an emergency. He was like, so you don't be, you know, asking anybody else for money, you have your own. And so I told him, I was like, I plan to find a job as soon as I get there, for one thing, you know. And so, but anyway, you know, we talked and everything, but I looked at my father when I was getting ready to leave, and I had already had that dream about his death. So I knew he was going to die. I just knew it, okay? And so I figured, will he live long enough, you know, because I didn't know when he would die. I was like, will he live long enough for me to come home to visit or whatever, and he's still here or what? I just didn't know. My father died that next month, okay? So y'all know that story, okay? He died on my first day of school. But anyway, so he lived, I left December the 2nd of 1999, and my father died January 19th of 2000. So short, very, very short period of time, just over a month. But when I saw my father, something told me, nope, you're not going to see him again. This is your chance to, you know, say goodbye, hug him, do something, you know. And I didn't. And I regretted that. I was like, dang, I had the opportunity. And I said, I will never let that type of opportunity, if I know that it's going to happen, or if I feel that it's going to happen, I will never leave someone ever again without saying goodbye. I don't know why, but when I walked into that room and was sitting there talking to Mr. Andrews, I just knew. I said, this man is not going to live. I said, if he live a day, I would be surprised. I said, if he lives a day beyond this, I would be surprised. I was like, I know he's not going to live. And I had made that promise, and I thought of it. And since I knew I'd been blessed with this friendship and everything, I was like, okay, God, Do I say my goodbyes to them, or do I keep my mouth shut? What do I do here? And so then he kind of broke the ice. He was like, Davis, he was like, it's been good knowing you. It's been wonderful. I was like, it sure has. And I just spilled my guts. I was like, Mr. Andrews, I said, I know that God planned this. He let us meet. I said, I know this is the end. I said, I know this is it. I said, I'll never forget you. I said, I'll tell your story to anyone who will listen. I said, I will never, ever, ever forget you, Mr. Andrews. I said, I love you dearly. I said, you've been the replacement for my father, and I don't say that lightly, okay? Because they always say, don't nobody replace your parent, or don't nobody replace anybody that you've lost. I said, but you actually got me over the hump of losing a parent. I said, I had never lost one, and I lost my father. And so he basically kind of replaced it. It was like having a father all over again. And I just soaked it up. It was like having a father as an older person. I said, you've been like a grandfather. He was actually older than what my actual grandfather would have been. And my grandfather died. I lost my mother's father in 1973, the day before my 9th birthday. And then my other grandfather I lost at the age of 11. He died on the 16th of January of 1976. I'll never forget that day. Whoa, he actually died shoveling snow. That's how I remember that. And I was a kid, 11. So I didn't have a grandparent after that, other than my grandmother, my father's mother, and she died in 1979. I was 14 years old, almost 15. So, and my memories of them, although I was a little older with my later two grandparents, my father's parents, still my memories of them are vague. And I remember my grandmother, I saw her all the time. My grandfather too. I remember them, but it's just little details that I don't remember. I just remember them as the grandmotherly, grandfatherly, and then there were so many of us. We were just kind of there. We didn't have like that big close bond because it was over 48 of us grandchildren, and the great grands too. So we the cousins would be together. We just knew our grandparents were there, and we talked to them and things like that. But it wasn't something where they took up time and took us for the summer and things what other grandparents do. And they didn't buy us gifts and all that stuff. They would give my parents money and say, buy them, whatever. And then when we went to visit, they lived in a big 12-bedroom house because, they had 12 children. So everybody had their own room, even back in those days, my father and them. And so that house was so big, and it was just my grandparents there. And every now and then somebody would come and stay in the butler's apartment. This house was so big. It was a big historical type house. And it had an apartment on the side. I remember my aunt stayed there at one time before she married. And then a lot of my cousins stayed there. Like when they would marry or when they moved on their own, they rented from my grandparents. And it was a whole different house, but it was attached to their house. And you got through to the house through this little secret passageway. I mean, this house was like a plantation type house. But anyway, my grandparents, we weren't really close to them, but they would hide candy throughout this big, huge mansion. And when we kids got there, the big stampede of us would go on the treasure hunt looking for candy every time we were there, every time. And we always had some type of family dinner where we gathered and all that stuff. Growing up, that's my fondest memory of my grandparents. But that was as far as it went with them, And so anyway, back to Mr. Andrews. So I was like, you were like a grandfather, one that I would have liked to have had to have a bond with, So I just spilled my guts, and I was like, I know this is a goodbye. I said, it's been wonderful. I said, I will see you again one of these days. I say, if I make it to heaven, I was like, but I'm going to try my best to get there. And so knowing him just basically changed my life. Since then, I've just strived to be the best person I can be so I can see him and others that I've lost again, if they made it. And if they didn't, at least I'll be there, hopefully. But anyway, Anyway, so we said our goodbyes. And so then all of a sudden the people came to get him. And I was like, I'll be following you down. They were like, well, we have to take the freight elevator. They said, but you could take the regular elevator and meet us in the, it's like a discharge area right there by the lobby where I came in anyway. So they said, just wait for us there and we'll meet you down there. And they did. I waited, and then they came with him in the wheelchair. And so I walked to the van with them, watched as they got him in and everything. And then I hugged him, once he was in there, I was like, so long. And I knew that was the last time I would see him alive. I knew it. I just knew it. And so I knew it, but it still came as a shock, okay? Okay, so anyway, so they drove off and I went on home. So once I got home, I called his niece and I was like, he's on his way. He'll be there probably in about, Oklahoma City was like only 10 minutes away from Edmond. So I was like, he'll probably be there in 20 minutes. She was like, okay, I'm leaving now, so she left. And so she went to the nursing home and everything, and that was it. So then after he got settled in there, it was about she called me at about 8:30 that night. And she called me, she's like, I just got home. She's like, he's settled in, he's resting comfortably, he's doing good. I said, okay. I said, I'll be there tomorrow. And so she said, okay. I said, I'll be there tomorrow because I don't have school. So I'll go up there probably in the afternoon or whatever. And so she's like, okay, I'll see you there. And so anyway, that next morning, my phone never rang, but when I got up, I always turned on my computer for my messages and all that, because usually, like I said, I talk back and forth with my mother and my cousins and different ones. I got on, and the AOL said, you've got mail. So I'm like, okay, let me check my email. So I looked at the email, and there was a message from Mr. Andrews' other niece. This was actually his wife's niece, and I'm going to tell y'all about her today, as a matter of fact. In fact, I forgot her name, but she worked at the school, and she stayed in Langston, and she was she was always real nice to me while alone. But whenever she got around Mrs. Andrews or any other family member of his, she would cut her eye at me, and I could not understand. She just had me baffled. She would look at me real mean and everything. It was as if she's trying to show off to them to say, we're not going to like her. One of them type. Have you ever been around a bully that went along? The bully is real nice to you, but then when the bully get around the other people, they suddenly want to be the bully, or whatever, or to act like they don't like you so that they make the other people don't like you. So I knew she didn't like me. But my thing is, if you don't like me, don't be nice to me while we're alone, because I would see her there at the school. Hey, Q, and everything. She'd making small talk. But then when she got around them, she always gave me dirty looks. And then Mrs. Andrews and them were totally the opposite. We were good friends and they were friendly. I was like, unless they talking about me behind my back or something, but I just didn't believe that was the case. And they weren't that close either. They kind of crossed paths because Mrs. Andrews and his family were dealing with him. She saw him if she happened to stop by to say hi to him or something. She wasn't in the clique, so to speak. I was around more than she was, definitely. But I would see her on campus because she worked there, and then she had a granddaughter that attended school there. So that's how I knew her. And it happened to be later when I found out she was even related. And she was actually Mr. Andrews' wife's niece. And so anyway, but, she was in. And so especially during the funeral time, and stuff. But I had an email from her because she had my email address. And so apparently Mrs. Andrews couldn't get in touch with me, so she called the niece and asked the niece to get in touch with me because she knew that the niece had my information because she worked in like the administration's office, so she knew the other niece could look up my information. So it was an email from her, the meanie, okay? And the title in it said Mr. Henry Andrews. No, it said Uncle Henry, and then she put Andrews after. I knew, my heart sunk. I was like, uh-oh. If this is about Mr. Andrews, he done died. Sure enough, the email said, Q, she's like, Arnetta could not get in touch with you She could not get in touch with you, but she wanted me to let you know that Uncle Henry passed away last night. And I think she put 9:30. I was like, no, yeah, 9:30. I was like, she had just called me at 8:30 and she said he was doing good. I found out later. She told me, she was like, the moment I hung up from you, she was like, the second I hung up that phone, she's like, the phone rang. And it was the nursing home, and they asked me if I could come back up there. And she's thinking, why do I need to come back up there? Mr. Andrews had died. She said she got there, and the nurse had went to go, they had got him settled in and everything, and I think they went to go get him some ice chips or something. I can't remember, but she left out that room. The nurse had left out that room, she said, for no more than 2 minutes. And when she came back, he was gone. So that was it. So that's how that happened, okay? So anyway, so I didn't cry or anything because I knew. And I was like, wow, God just took them on, you know. So I was, and at that point, I was ecstatic that I had said my goodbyes to him and told him everything I thought and how I felt and everything. And so I was like, well, he'll be my guardian angel now. So anyway, so in the meantime, okay, so Mr. Andrews had died. So in the meantime, I was like, well, let me call Felicia and let her know, because I'm quite sure, you know, I knew that, not Felicia, Alicia, sorry, I did it again. I was like, let me call Alicia and let her know, because I'm quite sure she does not know what all had transpired, like in the past few days here, you know, with him getting ready to go to the nursing home. And I had, you know, I hadn't really been in touch with her because so much was happening between me, school, and all that stuff. I really hadn't seen her since maybe midsummer. It might have been July or June. It was actually June, right before or right after he had gone into the nursing home. That was when I saw her, and I think I saw her one other time after that. And so we never even really mentioned Mr. Andrews because it was like in passing. But the thing is, okay, so she had told me that she would go to see him on these days. And then I said what days I would go. So I kept my end, but I'm in Guthrie, she's in Langston. So she had a further drive than me to go see him. And I knew she had a family and all. So, but when I found out she had never once been up there, it kind of made me mad. But then again, I thought, well, maybe she just couldn't do it. But then, you know, we were holding our own anyway. But here it is. I tried to call her to let her know that he had passed. That's number one. No answer. So I kept trying to call her because it went a whole week. And I'm like, she's got to know that he passed because he lived in Langston. It was in the newspaper that he passed. I don't think it made the news, but it was in the newspaper. I was like, okay, I know she reads the Gazette, which was the Langston Gazette. I know she reads the Oklahomian, which was the name of the Oklahoma City newspaper that came to Langston. I was like, I know she know. I was like, but I was still trying to call her to fill her in on the details of everything that happened, you know. And so I never got an answer. I called and called and called different people who knew her. No one, it's like no one knew, you know, she never called. I was leaving messages. So on the day of the funeral, I had, of course, the funeral was going to be in Langston. So I went to Langston, and I went extra early because the funeral was going to be at 1:00 p.m. in the heat of the day, of course. I left at about 10:30, and I was like, I can go by Alicia's, and, you know, we can go to the funeral together or whatever. And, you know, I had viewed him and everything. I looked for her at the viewing because he was at the funeral home in Guthrie. I sat there at the funeral home for a long time. I looked for her there. She never came through. I'm like, what is up with her? You know? And so I went to her house. I'm like, forget trying to call her. I'm going to the house. I knocked on the door. I'm banging on the door. No answer. I kind of peeked through the curtains. I was like, okay, she still live here, because I'm wondering if she got put out, because she had told me, you know, she told me that she had transferred schools and everything. She was going to not OU, but OSU, Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma State wasn't too far at all. So I'm like, why is it she's not answering? I'm like, where is she? And so I was like, okay, I'll see her at the funeral. I'm not going to trip out about it. So I get to the house because Mrs. Andrews wanted me to uh, not ride in a funeral car. I don't even know if they had, I don't even think they had a funeral car. But she wanted me to meet them at the house so that, you know, she wanted me to walk in with the family and all this stuff. And he had a decent sized family. And the funeral, I felt, should be bigger than what it was, but the one part I missed. And actually the day before when I saw this, I didn't think much of it. I was like, oh, it'll be straightened out tomorrow, because he was just at the funeral home. And I noticed at the funeral home, he didn't have any flowers. And I was like, oh, they'll get the flowers, you know, the family and then friends and stuff. You know how people send, because like when my mother died, flowers started coming in like the night before and all that stuff. And so by the time my mother's funeral the next day, and you know, we weren't supposed to have no more than 10 there, but they squeezed 20 into my mother's. But the whole doggone room where her funeral was full of flowers. So the flowers came in a little bit later due to, you know, the pandemic and how things were. So when I didn't see any flowers, I didn't think much of it. I get to that funeral the next day. A man who had lived 102 years, and as much as he had done for so many people, and as well loved he was supposedly loved, this man had not one flower. He had bought, because when his wife died, he decided to buy a matching casket, which was pure pine, because he had told me before he died, he was like, oh, I have the nicest casket. It cost a lot of money. He's like, my wife was buried in this pine casket, and I got one for myself. He said, so he had set up his whole thing. He had this beautiful, nice, shiny wooden pine casket, beautiful, and not a flower to be found. And I couldn't afford a flower, because I thought to myself, oh man, I wish I could afford some flowers, you know, to at least get them some flowers. But I didn't have any money, for real. I would have figured out a way, if it would have meant standing on the corner, if I had known that man was going to end up with not a petal, not a dandelion, not even a weed to put on top of the casket. When they committed him to the ground, you know how they take the 3 flowers. They didn't even have that. And so they had the casket. Actually, in Oklahoma, they do things differently. They opened the casket again. That in itself traumatized me, but I'm jumping ahead. Okay, so we get there for the funeral. So I'm there, and I finally get to meet Zethel, the niece, the one who was named after his late daughter and who was over everything. So Zethel was mad because the airplane, the airport had lost her luggage. Hold on just one second. Okay, I'm back. I had to get a sip of water. Okay, we're over an hour, so we're going to be wrapping this up. Okay, so anyway, so I met Zethel and everything. So there she is, you know, she came for the funeral and everything. And she looked nothing like how I imagined. You know how you imagine how someone would look and everything. And I really liked her because her voice was exact to one of my aunts. She talked like her, had the same mannerisms, everything. She reminded me so much of my Aunt Audrey, and we called her Leco. So Aunt Leco, L-E-C-O. She reminded me so much of my Aunt Leco. And I was like, wow, you remind me of my aunt. You even look like her, you know. But anyway, so we got to meet, and she was all friendly. And of course, the eye cutter was there. The niece of the wife, who she giving me the dirty look the whole time. So I'm like, let me get somewhere and sit down, you know, because I'm being misfriendly. And I'm like, okay, this is their family. She's letting me know this. And so I'll make sure. I said to myself, okay, I'll drive with them to the funeral, but I'm going to make sure. I'm funny like that, y'all. If I'm not your family, I'm going to sit on the other side. That's just like when my godmother died. My godmother's daughter pulled a move on me. when she died, we all in the same room when she died, and she said something out of the way to me. I was like, I'll fix you. And so when it came time for the funeral, yeah, my name was there, and the godsons and all the other godchildren and stuff, and they sat over there with the family. I sat on the opposite side. That's me. Nope, I'm not sitting with you if you've made me feel the least unwelcome, you know, during this whole thing. I'm just funny like that. I'm the type, if you don't like me, hey, fine. I'll stay away from you. It's no problem. We can coexist. And so that's what it was. So when that other niece made me feel uncomfortable, I sat on the opposite side, and I ended up not attending the family dinner. Oh man, and Miss Andrews called. She was like, "Where were you? Where were you? We were looking for you." Blah. I had gone home to cry, and it wasn't because of the niece. I just went home to cry because I was so overwhelmed and upset, and nothing I could say or do. When I'm walking into this funeral and there's not a flower, I don't know why that bothered me. So it still bothers me to this day. But anyway, but first of all, we get to the house, I meet Zethel and stuff, and then all of a sudden, Mrs. Andrews, she was like, and I still cannot believe they did this. They broke into Mr. Andrews' house the night before the funeral, and all they stole was his TV. So somebody broke in there and stole his TV. Okay, so and they broke the window. Of course, they had broke the window to his den, because he had like a den. It was an extra bedroom, but he had it set up with this as his TV room. He had a table in there, and he had the TV. I guess they might have wanted the grandfather's clock, because that was, other than his antiques, that he had in there, that was the most expensive thing that he had, that grandfather's clock. But they just stole the TV. So probably some student or whatever, but whoever it was, they knew he had passed away. And it had happened because the niece, I was checking on the house, and then his niece and them, they were going there at least once a week, and they had been there the day, in the days leading up to his funeral, because family were coming by, bringing food, things like that. So the house hadn't been broken in and nothing had been stolen up until the night. So they did it the night before the funeral, whoever did it. And the TV wasn't anything. It was just a regular, one of them TVs without a remote where you turn the dial. It was one of them 1970s TVs or whatever, before remotes came out. So whoever wanted that, they were just in there and decided, well, I'm going to take the TV, whatever. So anyway, so I was kind of upset about that, although I didn't express anything when I heard about it. I just thought, that's how much they cared about him, I guess. That's what I'm thinking to myself. A man that was the most important person other than God in my life, for that to happen, And so, but everything else was there and intact. And so anyway, so we go to the church, Mount Bethel. That was the name of the church, his church, and the church, Mount Bethel Baptist. So we go on to Mount Bethel Church for the funeral. So, we drive there and stuff. And of course, we go in. I marched on in with the family, but then I took my seat on the opposite side from the family. So then here comes the president of the university. And he sees me, and of course I get the dirty look from him too. And I'm giving him the look like, ha, ha, ha. You don't look at me like this. I don't go to your school no more. But anyway, so he's there, and he sits on the same side as the family, like he's family or whatever. Maybe they invited him to sit there. And so, the funeral's going on. It wasn't a long funeral. And so the part came in the funeral for remarks, and they said, we have no one on program, because really too many who knew him, were already dead. So just those who knew him. So they were like, we giving everybody 3 minutes if you want to speak. And so I decided I would speak. And why? I don't know, because I'm not even a public speaker. You wouldn't think with the way I talk, but no, getting in front of a crowd to speak. But that was one of 2 funerals that I spoke at that I felt I had to. And so anyway, I knew the president was going to speak, so everybody kind of waited. It's like everybody kind of looked at him when the guy announced anybody to come speak. So the president jumps up with his important self, and he walks his way up there, and he speaks about Mr. Andrews. And I'm thinking to myself, if you knew what he thought about you, buddy, in the end, with this book deal business. And so after he got through speaking, he spoke, eloquently and distinguished and all that. Then he sits down. So then no one else got up. So I was like, okay, here's my chance. So I got on up. I stood up, and I walked up to the front. I'm way at the back of the church, and I'm like, okay, why did I sit way back here? I could have, been up a little bit further. So I went on up there. I get to the microphone. And so some of my friends are there, by the way. Alicia was not there, okay? But I didn't know who was there, because although the church wasn't that big, it was big enough to where, unless you're just looking at every face, I didn't know if she had come or not because I was way at the back, and then you had your people up front. And at that point, I wasn't focused on anyone. The only one I saw was my friend Marilyn, who handled the apartments at the school. Who was a good friend of my uncle and myself. And so she was there because she belonged to the church, and she was the one who actually told me about Mr. Andrews when I first got there and asked about worms. And so she was in the choir stand. Oh, another thing that I missed. Let me tell y'all. Mr. Andrews was buried in a cream colored suit. I had a cream, and it wasn't even planned. I only had the one suit while I was there in Oklahoma. I brought it back with me after my father's funeral. My mother, sister, and I, we all three had the same matching suits for my father's funeral. And so I brought mine back to Oklahoma. And so they had purchased mine before I even got home for the funeral. And then I just brought it back with me when I returned. And so I wore that suit to Mr. Andrews' funeral. So actually we're in the same color, and that was not planned or anything. I just thought about it when I saw him, when I viewed him the day before at the funeral home. I thought, oh, he has on the cream colored suit, and that's what I'm wearing tomorrow, my one little cream colored suit. Y'all, it was after September, and I had no idea. In the South, after the month of September, you are to wear black to every funeral. Some of y'all, if any of y'all in the South, y'all know, or you may have heard that. I had no idea. I'm from Michigan, you guys. We wear whatever color, we wear whatever during any time of the year. Some people will wear black, to a funeral, but for the most part, girl, y'all, people come in pants. People dress however they want to dress for a funeral. It's no rhyme or reason here in Michigan, okay? Because we go to enough funerals. In the South, people don't die as often. But here, somebody is dying every other doggone day. So you go into a lot of funerals if you choose to go. And so anyway, here I am like a sore thumb in this cream color suit. And I noticed that the moment I walked in that church, every living soul in there, had there been a monkey, had there been a dog, had there been a tree in there, it would have been dressed in black. Everybody. And there I was in this cream color suit. Why did I even go up there to speak? But I was like, ain't nothing stopping me, doggone it. I'm sticking out like a sore thumb. So be it. And that's probably why that one niece cut her eye at me that day when she saw me walking in there in that cream colored suit. She probably thought, oh Lord, look at this fool, just from the north. But anyway, so I got up there, I started speaking. I said, how we met. I told him the whole story. I was like, I told him, I said, I read the Delaney sisters book. I saw the movie. I said, and I prayed and asked God to let me be able to go to college. And I prayed and asked him to meet a centenarian. So I told that part of the story. And I said, and Mr. Andrews was the one that God blessed me to meet. I was like, and I had no idea he was 100 years old. I said, my friend who's here told me about the worm, that he sold worms, but not once did she mention that he was 100 years old. And she had no idea I had prayed this prayer. And then I was like, then I met the niece and nephew, and when I saw them first, and then they told me how old he was, I thought, this is it. And I said, I soaked it all up. We had a great time. I said, it was just beautiful. I said, I will miss him dearly. I said, and I consider it to be an honor to have met him. And then that's when the tears came. I was like, I am honored to have met him. I lost it, okay? So I get through that, and I finally get back to my seat. And Marilyn, the lady who had told me about him, she was like, Q, she was like, I knew you was gonna cry. She was like, I'm surprised you didn't cry before you did. She was like, you did good. I was like, girl, I was so embarrassed afterwards because I swore I wasn't gonna shed a tear. And there I was, but I'm glad that I did. And then I couldn't turn it off. So when the funeral was over with, okay, so now I'm gonna tell you, in the North, this is how funerals are conducted. You get to the funeral, the casket is open. Of course, you had a viewing the day before. Then you get to the funeral, the casket is open, And then everybody, the family comes in, and then they allow the most immediate of family, like sons and daughters, grandchildren, that type of thing, whoever's closest to the decedent, go up to the casket one last time, look at them one last time. Sometimes they can assist with closing the casket, some don't. And then you go back to your seat, and then they close the casket. And once that casket is closed, you will not see that person again until you reach the upper room, okay? That's how it's done up north in Michigan. That's it. So that's why any type of crying that's going to happen is going to happen right then and there. You know that's it. Once that casket is closed, it's not getting reopened at all, period. In the South, it's a whole different ball game. So they had closed the casket and everything. So I'm thinking, okay, I won't see him again and stuff. So that's why I was kind of upset about, the fact that I cried, because it should have been over with. Of course, when they closed it the first time, I shed a tear, but, it wasn't nothing loud or anything. And a few others that kind of like shed a tear. Anyway, all of a sudden, when the funeral was over with, after the preacher preached and stuff, the pallbearers come up. I'm thinking it's time. They getting ready, because when the pallbearers come up, you getting ready, the family to stand and all that stuff, and they roll the casket out. They said, we will now have the parting view. I'm like, the parting view? What the hell? The pallbearers opened the casket back. I'm like, oh man, it ain't over. They opened the casket back. And so it started with the family. They had to go, everybody walked around the casket for the parting view. Then the friends. So we all had to walk around the casket for the parting view. And then after we had our parting view, the friends leave the church first. And then after that, the family, they take the casket out. They close it, of course. And then the family, I didn't hear no crying or nothing crazy, but they closed the casket and then they rolled him out. The casket was closed. We were outside, no flower barrels, of course, because there were no flowers, because I was going to at least be a flower bearer if they had, had flowers. Anyway, they rolled the casket out, and then the family comes behind the casket, everybody dressed in black. So I'm like stood to the side, because everybody just stood to the side. Men took off their hats and stuff. It was quite a few people at this funeral, more than what I thought would be there. And we all waited as the family passed. They got him loaded into the hearse, and then, and at that point, that was it for me. I was done. I went on home. I didn't go, oh, no, I didn't. Not then. I went home after the cemetery. So we were going to the cemetery. It's called Beulah Land, okay? And that's as southern as it gets in a black town, huh? Beulah Land Cemetery. So we get to Beulah Land, which was probably a block away or whatever. I didn't even know that cemetery was there, because it was like off the side of a dirt road. Next thing I know, I saw this big giant gated sign that said Beulah Land. I was like, I feel like I'm going into heaven or something. Anyway, we get to Beulah Land. And so it wasn't that big of a cemetery. So he was buried next to his wife. So they had the thing open and everything. So I go up there and I'm like, okay, how are they going to commit his body to the ground? Because they do the 3 flowers, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, and they put the dust to dust flower, I'm like, how are they going to do this? And so we get up to the, we're all standing around, at the cemetery, and it was quite a few. All the people who were at the funeral basically went to the cemetery. So it was quite a few of us. And so we're looking, all of a sudden, they open the casket again. I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, I'll be damned. They done opened the casket again at the cemetery. And so they opened it, and that's how the body was committed. So they didn't really need the flowers, to do it. We sitting up there looking at him, and he did the committal, earth to earth, and then he said the prayer and everything and all that. Then the funeral home people closed the casket for the last time. And then that's when, you had tears, a few people cry. I didn't. Wait a minute. I was shell shocked. I had already done my crying. I was like, oh no, ain't a tear coming out my eye. I was shell shocked that's how that went. I had never seen nothing like that in my life. Then it gets worse. So then they closed the casket. And so us, when they commit the body, it's no casket opening or nothing, but the casket is there and it's on top of the little thing, that they're going to lower the casket down with. But you do not stay for that part. They conclude the funeral services and you leave the cemetery and your loved one is there still at the top of that thing, and they do the burial while you're not there. You have to pay extra if you want to see the burial, and no one usually does. We all just leave because that's what we do. With Mr. Andrews, they began to lower him into the ground. And of course, I'm looking down there and there's water down there because they've dug. There's always water underneath. That's why they put that green stuff around. But they had to remove all that since they were lowering the casket down. And that's when I looked and saw there was water down there. And so they started lowering the casket slowly, of course. And, those who were crying, they lower it down. And then after that, everybody, and I'm just standing there because I didn't know what was going to happen next. I was watching. Everybody started scooping dirt with their hands and with the shovels that were provided and covering up his body. So everybody there scooped dirt. I didn't. I just stood there and watched. Everybody scooped dirt. And they covered, and they covered, and they covered until he was totally buried, until that dirt reached the top. So this went on for about a good 30 minutes, if not longer. Once the dirt was covered over the top, then the funeral home, the cemetery people patted the dirt down. He already had the tombstone from his wife, and then his name was next to it. They set the tombstone, boom, on top of the grave. And that was it. It was so final to me. I was like, I've never seen nothing like this in my life. It traumatized me. And so when I got in the car to leave, I got in the car and I'm like, I'm not going to that church for the repast. I'm going home. I just felt so bad. I was like, the man who had not a flower, he lived all this time. And for them to finalize it like that, I was like, it's just too much. It was just too much for me. It was as if he never lived. I was like, all this, I went through all this for that. And I know that's selfish, but it was just, I had never seen nothing like that in my whole life. And I haven't seen anything like that since. I didn't go to my uncle's funeral, so I have no idea what they did at his. I did not go because I don't fly. So I wasn't going. And I didn't. That was back last November. But I tell you, I was just traumatized, shell-shocked, okay, from that. I get home, and I just sat there and cried because I felt bad for everything that had happened, how it all ended, and I was just extremely sad. I was like, okay. So I'm like, how do I make myself feel better? I started pulling out the tapes of him telling his story, and I started listening to, I forgot the main part, Alicia. Okay, so I did find out that she wasn't at the funeral because at the cemetery, I'm looking at the faces. I'm like, where in the heck is she? So then I had left a note on her door. I was like, Alicia, where are you? I'm like, I've been trying to find you for the past week. If you see this note, please call me. And I left my number. I get home and she had left a message on my machine and left a number for me to call her back at, which was a different number from the one I had been calling. I think she had gotten a cell phone because, cell phones was out. I just couldn't afford one at the time. So I called the number and she answered. I said, I've been trying to get in touch with you for a week. I was like, I just got back from Mr. Andrews' funeral. She was like, Mr. Andrews' funeral? I'm like, uh-oh, here it comes. She started crying and bawling. I said, Alicia, I said, he died a week ago. I was like, I told you about the nursing home. I was like, and then I tried to let you know that he had went to the hospital because and I was like, because I said he had to go to Oklahoma City. I was like, you said you were going to be there on all these days. She was like, I never went. I was like, and I said, I tried to call you. I've come by. I've done this. I've done that. I was like, so much was going on. I was like, so I couldn't really stay in touch. I was like, because we both transferred schools. I was like, and you didn't know he had passed away? I was like, no one talked about it. I was like, it was in the newspaper. I was like, where have you been? She just boo-hooing. You should have tried harder. Oh, then I became the big bad wolf all of a sudden. She wanted to blame me for the whole, for what, this is what I felt. I felt that if she really cared about him enough, hold on just a second, another drink of water, be right back. Okay, sorry, my mouth turned into cotton mouth. I had to get another drink of water. Okay, I felt that if she had cared about him and if she had done what she was supposed to do or said that she was going to do, she would have at least known what was happening. Not to mention, when he died, I tried to call her for a whole week to at least let her know what was happening then. And I went by the house on the day of the funeral. I felt I had done my part, okay? My aunt told me, the one I was telling you about, the one who I was close to, she told me I was as wrong as two left shoes. I might be. But I told her I don't feel I was wrong. She felt that I should have tried harder to get in touch with Alicia. I told her, first of all, Alicia lived 15 miles away. I was like, and all this driving back and forth, I wasn't trying harder. I had school. I was dealing with Mr. Andrews. I was doing all this stuff. And all she had to do, she could have called me. She had my number. She knew where I lived. She knew where I lived because I told her I moved to Chowning Heights. And her mother lived in Edmond, so she knew where I lived. She knew where that hospital was. She knew where the nursing home was. And the nursing home would have told her, that he went to Oklahoma City, and she could have called me. Because I always wondered, why hadn't she called me to find out, where he's at and all this stuff. And so that's why my aunt, I guess, felt that I should have made more of an effort. But I was doing too much at the time, and my mind was not there. But when it was there, and I had the opportunity, she was the first person I thought about to try to keep updated with everything, and including the funeral, because I found it odd that she never answered her phone when I tried to call her to let her know about his death a week before. And then, like I said, I didn't go all the way into Langston until the day of the funeral, but I went to the funeral home, and I was like, if she has to know, because everybody in town knows. Half the town was there. So how she didn't know, I still do not know to this day, because we ended up, when she started blaming me, I was like, hold it now. I did try to contact you. I was like, why weren't you at the nursing home? I'm asking these questions that I'm not getting any answers to. So whatever the answer was, I never found out. She just kept going off on me about it. I was like, well, if that's the way you feel, that's the way you feel. Well, it's over now. I said, it's done. I was like, but if you had done what you were supposed to do, or what you said you were going to do, I was like, if you couldn't do it, that's fine. I was like, just say so. I said, but because you didn't do it, this is the consequence. I said, and I have spent the week constantly calling you. I mean, I was trying to call her 4 and 5. I called morning, noon, night, every chance I got. I was trying to call her for all of those 7 days that we waited from the time that he died, which was on a Monday, until that following Monday, which was the day of his funeral. And then I went to her house and knocked on the door and left a note, and then finally she saw it, and she had no idea that this man had even died. So the fact that she didn't know that he had died had me mind boggled, because everybody and their mother knew that Mr. Andrews had died. Okay, so how she didn't know is beyond me. But anyway, so our friendship broke up that day. She was like, well, I'll never forgive you for this, and I'll never speak to you again. I was like, okay, goodbye, click. That was it. I was like, I don't have time for this. And I knew the book deal was over with. I said I would do what I promised to do. But I did, the lady from Oklahoma Heritage, because I did call to let them know that he had passed. And so they actually, did they come to the, I believe the lady, one of the representatives, it was a representative there, but they didn't speak and didn't talk or anything, but they were there at the funeral, I guess probably to make sure he was dead. But the lady called me a few days after the funeral. She called me and she was like, now you know that we can still do this book. She was like, posthumous. I think she said posthumously or whatever the word is. She was like, so if you, I said, well, Alicia and I, our friendship broke up. I said, so I don't know if we're going to be able to do it. I was like, we hadn't signed anything. We really hadn't gotten things gone. I was like, I got his story recorded. I have all the tapes. I said, she doesn't have anything. I have all the tapes. I have the videotapes. I have all the information. I was like, which is enough to put in a book if we wanted to do it. I said, but now I found out his niece and nephew was not over his estate. I said, so the ones who they had to talk to the other niece, Zethel, which they knew about, but they hadn't met her. I said, Zethel would have to give the go-ahead for the book to continue. The other ones would not. And so I told them, I will get in touch with this Zethel. And I said, not now, though. I said, she's here. I said, but she'll be going back to California probably in a couple of days after they wrap things up. And I don't want to interrupt that. I said, I will be able to get in touch with Zethel after that. In fact, Zethel and I, when we got acquainted there at the house, we ended up, she gave me she was like, I want your address. And she was like, here's my address in case you want to keep in touch with me. That's just how friendly she was. And so I got it. So I had her address and her phone number. And so what happened was, so after that happened, I told the lady I'll be back in touch. And we stayed in touch for a long time, even after I got back to Michigan. And so I ended up getting sick shortly thereafter because he died the 26th. His funeral was like October the 1st. Let's see, all that business happened with my uncle that following week. Then in November, the family friend of ours died of a sudden heart attack. And then November, I was having all these symptoms where I couldn't hardly stay woke. I would be tired and stuff. I'm still in school. And then December, I got sick. And then one of Mr. Andrews' nephew, who was actually blood related to the eye cutter, he ended up getting sick and he ended up dying. And then one of my other good friends ended up dying. He was the one who ran the restaurant there in Langston. He ended up dying. I was like, what is going on? It's like everybody who was associated with Mr. Andrews are either dying or something's happening. You know, it's like everybody, with the exception of the niece and nephew, everybody associated with him, they either died or something happened or something, because two people had died. Then I ended up getting sick, and I was like, okay. So this was it dawned on me from the beginning. It didn't take me forever to figure out what had happened, because when I got sick, and there I was kicked out of Langston at UCO, I got sick while I was there. And then my mother ended up coming, because I woke up Christmas Day almost dead. And I'm telling you, it was a nightmare. And I ended up going home. But I will tell this part, because that's going to come up in my college story next. And then I'm through with this. But what happened was, before my mother got there, you know, the other friends had died and stuff. And then I got sick. But immediately, when I got sick and my mother had to come, and I knew I was going to be leaving Oklahoma and returning to Michigan, I said, okay, now I know my whole purpose. Because when I did my prayer, and I tell people, because people's like, weren't you mad? You had gotten all the way to your third year, and then all of a sudden all this happened and you never finished in this. I said, nope. I realized from the beginning, I only prayed for two things. I prayed to go to college, and I prayed to meet a centenarian. I went to college and I met a centenarian. The centenarian died. It was time to come home. I never once prayed to God to let me graduate college. In fact, I like the fact that I got the experience and got to go, but I never once thought that I would graduate, because I knew I was too poor in math to graduate. I would have to cheat in order to graduate. So I always knew I wasn't going to finish because of that. But I said I would give it my all with everything else that I knew I was good at, and I did. I came out with a 3.7 GPA, math, And the reason why I didn't hit a 4.0 because I failed every math class. In fact, I would drop and I would take the 0. And then when I finally gave it a go that last semester, when I had that 3 o'clock class, I failed it. I got the F, and that kept me at the 3.7, but I had to take the math class. And I couldn't drop it either because I wanted to drop it, but they were on to that. So they were like, nope, you can't drop it. You have to take it, and I failed it. And that was that. And so that had me, I was at the 3.7. So I was like, maybe I can just, I could have rolled college out and just kept failing the math and just keep the other grades up. But I wouldn't have graduated without that math. You got to pass it. So that was it. So when it was over, it was over. And I knew I wasn't going to finish. And from the beginning, I figured I wasn't going to finish. But then it dawned on me, I never prayed to finish. I guess God could have opened my brain up to do that math. And I could have finished. But that didn't happen. So there I was home. It never once upset me. In fact, I was relieved and glad to be back home. Number one, I'm sick. But number two, even if I hadn't been sick, I would have been relieved and glad to be back home. Okay? It almost feels like a Wizard of Oz type story, when she went to Emerald City and then no place like home. That's how I felt. There's no, Auntie M, clicking the heels, okay? That's how I felt. There's no place like home, especially when you're sick. And I've been home ever since, okay? I haven't even been back to Oklahoma. I've had plenty of times to go back. In fact, I said I would go back. In fact, I would like to move back to Oklahoma. I loved the state, but I've just never been back. Never went back. Haven't been to Mr. Andrews' grave. Nothing. Haven't seen. I have friends there. I'm friends with them now. We're in touch on Facebook and stuff, and they keep begging me, when you going to come visit us? Blah, 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 blah. Don't make us have to come up north. Stuff like that. I just haven't been back. And I said I would eventually go back. I don't know. I may or may not. Then my sister at one time was talking about moving there after retirement. I was like, oh, Lord, so that means I got to go back too. Because she was like, yeah, I can't move and you not go because we had decided on either South Carolina, Oklahoma, and we thought about Georgia. We just wanted a warmer climate. Well, she wants a warmer climate, but now she's decided she wants to stay in Michigan. I was like, fine with me. She was like, we're used to the snow. We may as well hang out here. So fine, good. Because she was like, I don't feel like packing and moving to another state. Good, because we're old. We can stay right here. Okay, so that will conclude the story. I'm quite sure I probably missed something. If something else ever come up, because when I tell the college story, Mr. Andrews is going to be in there again. I'm quite sure. Because in order to tell my story, I have to intertwine him, which is what he wanted me to do anyway. So as we get through certain periods, especially when my father died and when school first started and stuff, when I delve more into all that, then I'll be telling about Mr. Andrews again. You already know, how we met and how that happened and all that stuff. So he'll come up again in my story when I talk about the college years and whatnot and things like that. And after I, got sick and came home and all that, and different ones that I met. So it'll be different people in that story as well as Mr. Andrews. Boy, that's going to be a story. So you will hear about that pretty soon. How many minutes? Did we go over an hour? I know we probably, oh Lord, we done went an hour and 37 minutes, 90 minutes, y'all. So we did go over an hour. So I hope I didn't ramble too much. And I hope that you enjoyed the story about Mr. Andrews. And I will be trying to get to that shed before the winter. I'm getting ready to get the groundhog hole fixed. And I'm gonna put a piece of wood over it, okay? And so that will allow me back into the shed without falling into the hole. And then I'm gonna go and pull all that stuff out, because I really want to get to work on researching to find out how I can get those tapes made into a CD to preserve them and whatnot, because I would love to hear his voice again, And then I've got the videotape. I don't have a VCR anymore. I need to get that changed into a DVD, that type of thing, just to preserve the stuff. And then all the articles and other things that I have, related to them, the photos and everything. Because if I write a book about myself, which I still may end up doing, I don't know. If I write a book about myself, then I could still incorporate him into it. So I would have pictures and different things like that, you know, talking about him. Okay, so I'm going to get off of here, you guys, and I hope you've had a wonderful Sunday. I'm getting ready to go in here. I'm not cooking big today because it was 97 degrees today. It is burning up. And so I'm not going to heat up this house. So I think I'm going to make a salad and what else? I forget. I think I took out some catfish or something. So I might bake that or whatever. I don't know. I should have been grilling today, but I didn't feel like going out to get any charcoal. But anyway, I'm going to get dinner and I'm going to get ready to get off of here and relax the rest of the evening. And look for me. I'm getting ready to start the tutorial and I'll be posting that on the 14th. So I will be making the shawl with this orange. And like I said, I think you will enjoy this one better. So I'll be getting started with that. That's where I'm going to be starting up tomorrow. You may or may not see me on Wednesday. I don't know. We'll see if something comes up. And I need to come on, I will. If not, then I'll see you next Sunday. Okay, talk to you later. Wait, no. You won't see me Sunday. Today's the 10th. Okay, 4 days. Wait, 11, 12, 13, 14, Monday. You'll see me Thursday. The upload will be Thursday, so you'll see me then. So no, it won't be Wednesday. It'll be Thursday. You'll see me then. And then I may start my story on Sunday, depending on how I feel. So anyway, I will talk to you guys later because I feel like I'm rambling. And may God bless you all. Bye-bye.